Alright folks, this is precision nymphing, precision nymph fishing, and if you'd like to know what that's all about, join me shortly, right after this. So folks, precision nymphing, what's it all about? Well, it relies on the same premise as virtually every other nymphing technique, insofar as you need to get your nymph to the fish without him knowing that you're attached to it. That's it in a nutshell. And of course, the level of difficulty in achieving that is exacerbated in a big way when the river drops very low like it is here. We've had virtually drought conditions now for maybe 6 weeks here. Virtually no rain at all, so the river is down to its bare bones. And whilst it makes it a little easier to identify where trout will likely be, catching them is a lot more difficult. And as the name implies, precision nymphing means a very precise cast in a place like this where the trout are most likely to be over there, because where I am here is virtually only ankle deep and this will hold no fish. So it's logical and safe to assume that this is where the fish will be. So that's where your efforts will have to be concentrated. Reading the river is an art form in itself, and it takes a beginner a while to begin to understand why fish might be there and not here. But they're over there because they feel more secure over there. And they have a flow of water coming in that's feeding them, bringing them food items. But because the river is very low, they're going to be even extra spooky and skittish. So your cast needs to be very exact. And how I set up for this type of nymphing is very, very simple. I'm using my old favourite rod that you'll all be familiar with if you've been watching my videos. This is my 9-foot 3-weight, and I just have a standard floating line, and to that I have attached a tapered leader, and it's a 12-foot tapered leader, and it's tapered down to 7x. And attached to that I have one of my little twin wire size 20 nymphs. When everything drops down to the level that it's at now, you need to drop down everything in size. If you were to throw in a standard size, say a 16 or a 14 size nymph in here now, it'll create a lot of disturbance. Even though it's only very tiny, it will create a level of disturbance that will likely alert the fish to your presence. So this little tiny nymph here creates virtually no disturbance on entering the water, and as a consequence is more likely to be taken and less likely to scare any trout that might be in there. So along with that, your approach to places like this will have to be, of necessity, very, very stealthy. If I was to stand up and walk in there, I'd likely be seen by a fish and he will scare all the other fish when he panics away from me, basically. So I'm going to try a couple of casts here and see whether there's a fish there or not. And hopefully they won't detect me. So my approach is going to be as stealthy as I can make it, given that it's very rocky here. So now it's unlikely that I've been seen on my way in, hopefully not anyway. And right here is where I think there's likely to be a fish. So I'm going to do something very important before I take my first cast. I'm going to grease the front part of the fly line and about 3 feet of the tapered leader. I want that to float very high. I want to be able to see it. Okay, should float fine now. Okay, here we go. Have a look around, see is there any trees or bushes behind? I have to watch for this one here. So. There we go, small, he got off. A small fish, but it's a result nonetheless. So if you like, I'm watching the tapered leader and where it enters the water for any hint of an indication. Now there's another place a little further out that I'm going to make my way out to, but I'm hoping that I won't scare any other fish in between here and there. And inevitably get caught in a tree. So now, as you can see, I'm standing up very bold here, which is likely to scare everything in the area. But there's one little spot just under the tree. So there you are, folks. Even the best laid plans don't always work out. Just caught, well, didn't actually even land him, but hooked one small fish and got stuck in the tree here, which meant I had to stand up. Any fish that were here most likely saw me and have now scattered. So that's just one example of how difficult it can be when we have low water conditions. Everything has to go right, and nobody gets it right all the time. So this is just one example. I'm going to go to another place now and hopefully get a better result. Now, as you can see, barely ankle deep water, and there's a huge expanse of it all around me here. And where are the fish going to be? A trout is going to naturally and instinctively seek out any place with a little bit more depth. And up here under these trees, there's an area where there's just a little bit more depth than I have here. And that's most likely where the trout will be. Now, in low water conditions like this, your approach to an area like this needs to be extremely stealthy. Any little thing will give the game away. Particularly if you wade heavily, you need to move very stealthily through the water so that you don't send any noises or vibrations through the water which will alert the fish. Now, there's no guarantee that there's going to be a fish in here, but it's the most likely place, and that's where I will concentrate my efforts. Seek out areas like these. Among very low water, seek out the place with a little bit more depth. And again, my size 20 nymph, which will create very little disturbance on entering the water. And another thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to false cast over the area initially, because if I false cast over it, it's likely that the fish will see the line in the air and that will scare them off. So I'm going to false cast out there, and then on the last throw of the line I'm going to flick it in there and hopefully catch a fish. Let's see. Now I'm moving very gingerly, as you can see. Don't want to make any noise of any kind. Keep a lower profile as I can. Now I'm false casting out here to the right and then flick it in real gently. It needs to be extremely gently. Now I've had 5 or 6 casts here, so it's unlikely I'm going to succeed. Because by this point, they're either not there or they've figured me out. That could have been a fish, I'm not sure. Could have been the bottom as well. There you go, folks. It's not easy, but when you do catch a fish in those sort of conditions, it's most satisfying. So, on to another place. Now, as you can see, I'm in ankle deep water again. Very, very low. And that goes out to almost 3/4 of the way, and then there's a tiny little bit of depth just under those trees. So that's where I'm going to throw the little nymph and see is there any resident there. Took a bit of work to get him out. Now, he's not a big fish by any measure, but enormous satisfaction in catching a fish in an area like that. Now, fella, back you go. Now, it's unlikely there's a second one, but I'm going to give it another cast just in case. He was right in under the tree. The nymph just happened to go in there, more by luck than judgment. Right. So one of the real secrets is being able to identify where the fish are likely to be. And that is relatively easy once you understand what a trout wants out of life. He just wants a little, enough to eat and somewhere safe and secure to live, much like every other animal, including ourselves. And those areas are clearly identifiable with a little experience on the river. So, let's look for another one. Now, just something else that's very important. And in order to be able to detect takes, you need to be able to see any movement on the front of the fly line or the floating part of your leader. So in order to see that, you need to maximize your chances of seeing it by getting the best light possible. The sun is over my right shoulder here now, and if I fish in that direction, for instance, if I'm fishing from here across the river, it's difficult to see the fly line because of the reflection from the sun. But when I move here and fish across in that direction, it's much, much easier to see. So it's important to bear that in mind when you approach the river, to try and figure out which way to fish it. I.e., your approach to any given part of the river, you have to determine, if you want to get the best chance of seeing indications, what light is best, coming from your right or coming from your left. It's a simple thing, but it can make a huge difference in detecting takes. Okay. Now I've re-greased my leader once again. You may find it necessary to do that periodically. I cannot overemphasize the importance of having the front part of your fly line floating high, and the 2 or 3 feet nearest the 2 or 3 feet of the tapered leader nearest to the fly line floating high as well when you're fishing very tiny nymphs. So I found a little bit of depth just here, and size 22 nymph again. There's a bit of downstream wind which makes it difficult. Size 22 is very, very small, so you have to punch it through the wind. Yes, small, but ooh. They really do like that small nymph. Well, it probably more approximates, for the most part, if you've ever opened up a trout and seen his stomach contents, you'll see that the majority of the food that they eat is very, very small indeed. Typically in the 20-22 range, so hence the effectiveness of a size 22 fly. Oh, that's 2 from that little area. Now, using a very long leader can be a little awkward at times, but it's necessary. Okay, I think I've had what I'm going to get out of there. Right, we'll look around and see if we can find another little bit of depth. Small one. Slightly better fish. By the way, always release them back that way behind you. And that way they're unlikely to swim up and scare any fish that might be in front of you. So folks, that's precision nymphing. When the river drops down, very, very low conditions, and to all intents and purposes, and some might even say, it's virtually impossible to catch trout. You can still catch them. All you have to do is fine everything down. Very fine leaders, very small nibs, a very stealthy approach, and probably most important of all is to understand where the trout would be in those conditions. Reading the river. And once you understand what a trout requires in life, and you study it and figure out the lies, the places they like to be in low water conditions, well then it's a relatively simple matter to target them with your stealthy approach, your very fine leader and your very tiny nymph. So I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you found it informative, and don't be afraid to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and you'll be notified of future videos. And I'm looking forward to a summer of fly fishing, and I'll have plenty more stuff to come, plenty more content. And once again, thanks very much for joining me. And Godiga Casper Arakela Arishmoit Biggie Slime agus Biggie Egiascraft. Slán go fóill.